look what we built. We've built a beautiful life.
So she found out on TV, but, they want to be financially independent.
Has Prince Harry left the throne?
That is a remarkably accurate.
Before Buckingham Palace issued a statement, a private warning reportedly crossed the Atlantic. It concerned King Charles, an unfinished royal decision, and the title Meghan had transformed into her most powerful public asset. This time, the palace was not merely discussing protocol. It was preparing to act. The first sign came not from an official announcement, but from a royal expert who claimed Charles had begun reconsidering how titles should be used by relatives no longer carrying out duties for the crown. The wording sounded careful, almost harmless, yet beneath it was a threat the Sussexes could not dismiss. Palace conversations had moved beyond private irritation. Senior figures were now examining whether royal rank should continue to provide public influence without royal responsibility. For Meghan, the title Duchess of Sussex was never just decoration attached to her name. It carried recognition across borders. It opened doors before she entered the room and gave every interview, project, and public appearance a connection to one of the world's most famous institutions. She had left the working monarchy, but the title ensured the monarchy had never completely left her. That was why the warning did not need to arrive on palace letterhead. According to the claim, it was passed through an intermediary, someone trusted enough to be taken seriously, but distant enough to give the palace deniability. No signature, no formal demand. Just a message suggesting that Charles was reviewing the future use of titles and that the consequences could reach far beyond ceremonial protocol. Harry understood immediately. His father did not allow questions this explosive to circulate casually. If the subject had escaped the palace walls, advisors had almost certainly studied the risks, the legal limits, and the public backlash. The warning was unofficial, but the machinery behind it felt very real. Meghan reportedly remained controlled. She had survived palace pressure before and understood the danger of reacting too quickly. But privately, the implications were impossible to ignore. Businesses, international audiences, and media outlets did not see only Meghan. They saw a duchess, someone still carrying the aura of royal legitimacy even after rejecting the system that created it. Inside the palace, that contradiction had become increasingly difficult to defend. Some believed the Sussexes wanted freedom from royal restrictions while preserving the prestige those restrictions had once protected. Charles had tolerated the arrangement because intervention could look cruel, personal, or even vindictive. Any action against Meghan could revive accusations of discrimination and turn a constitutional question into another painful family war. But this time, the proposal appeared broader. Charles might not be planning to remove one title in one dramatic strike. He could be preparing to redefine how every non-working royal uses rank, influence, and inherited status. Such a move would not merely embarrass Meghan. It could permanently shift power back toward the crown. But to understand why Charles may finally be prepared to cross this dangerous line, the story must return to the moment Meghan's title stopped being a wedding gift and became something far more powerful. When Meghan became Duchess of Sussex, the title appeared to symbolize acceptance, belonging, and a permanent future inside the monarchy. Years later, it had become something entirely different, a shield against irrelevance, a passport into elite circles, and proof that the palace could never completely separate itself from her. At the beginning, the title carried emotion as much as rank. It told the world that Meghan had not simply married Prince Harry. She had been formally welcomed into the royal structure. The name Sussex linked her to history, duty, and the authority of the crown. It suggested permanence. Whatever private doubts existed behind palace walls, the public message was clear: she now belonged. But belonging came with conditions. The title was never meant to serve personal ambition alone. It carried expectations, restrictions, and the responsibility to speak and act as a representative of the monarch. Every appearance was supposed to strengthen the institution. Every public statement had to respect an invisible line between individual identity and royal duty. Then Harry and Meghan stepped away, and that balance collapsed. The official role weakened, but the title survived. Duties disappeared. Restrictions loosened. Yet the words Duchess of Sussex remained attached to Meghan's name, preserving the prestige of royal life without many of its daily obligations. What had once been a symbol of service became a powerful form of protection. In American celebrity culture, that distinction mattered. Fame was common. Royal rank was not. The title created instant curiosity, opened conversations, and added historical weight to every new project. Meghan alone could command attention. But Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, carried something bigger, the lingering authority of Britain's monarchy. That was the palace's growing problem. Removing the title could make Meghan appear punished, targeted, or publicly humiliated. It could strengthen every claim that she had been rejected by the institution. But leaving it untouched allowed her to hold a form of royal influence while remaining outside royal control. Among senior family members, frustration quietly deepened. They continued attending ceremonies, accepting restrictions, and carrying the burden of public service while watching the Sussex title gain value thousands of miles away. To them, the arrangement appeared painfully uneven. William and Catherine reportedly understood the danger early. If the title continued functioning without duty, the exception could slowly become a precedent. Future royals might leave the system yet keep using its status as a permanent personal asset. Charles chose patience. He believed public attention would fade, commercial interest would weaken, and the Sussex name would eventually lose its royal force without direct confrontation. But the opposite happened. Time, however, did not weaken the title's power. Instead, every new Sussex venture forced the palace to confront a question it had avoided since the couple's departure. Who truly controls the royal identity once it has been granted? Royal titles come with written rules, but the most dangerous restrictions are rarely written at all. Behind palace doors, one principle has always remained sacred. No individual may turn the crown's authority into private power. According to insiders, Meghan came closer to testing that boundary than anyone expected. The distinction was subtle, but it carried enormous weight. A royal could possess a title as part of family identity, yet using that title in a way that suggested palace approval was something entirely different. The crown could tolerate independence. What it could not easily accept was the appearance that its authority had become fuel for a private empire. Traditionally, the palace avoided open confrontation. It relied on restraint, personal loyalty, and carefully delivered warnings. Problems were meant to be contained before they became public scandals. Legal threats were considered a last resort because every visible battle risked exposing the weakness behind royal control. But Meghan's situation did not fit the old system. Each time her royal identity appeared close to a commercial launch, media announcement, public campaign, or powerful new connection, concern reportedly grew among courtiers. No single project had to cross an obvious line. The danger came from repetition. Gradually, the title seemed to give private ventures the glow of royal importance, even when the palace had no involvement. Inside Charles's circle, two opposing arguments hardened. One faction believed the king had waited too long and must act before royal prestige became impossible to separate from the Sussex brand. Another warned that intervention would hand Harry and Meghan exactly what they needed, proof, in their eyes, that the institution remained determined to punish them. Harry stood in the middle of that conflict. Meghan saw Duchess of Sussex as part of her married identity, tied to her husband and children. Charles, however, viewed it as an honor created by the sovereign and therefore inseparable from the crown's authority. The disagreement was no longer about a name. It was about ownership. William's position was believed to be far less patient. He was not only judging the present crisis, he was imagining the monarchy he would one day inherit. If ambiguity continued, future royals could leave official life, reject its discipline, and still use its rank as permanent private currency. Senior aides quietly began examining old cases in which titles had been restricted, altered, suspended, or stripped of practical meaning without a humiliating public removal. Their research led to a confidential briefing prepared for Charles. Some options applied only symbolic pressure. Others could redefine the relationship between rank, duty, and public use across the entire family. The briefing did not remain a theoretical exercise for long. A new development inside the Sussex world reportedly convinced palace advisors that silence was no longer protecting the monarchy, it was protecting Meghan's greatest advantage. For years, Charles resisted the most aggressive advice placed before him. He feared worsening the family fracture and pushing Harry even further away. Then one Sussex decision reportedly altered the atmosphere inside the palace, transforming an old irritation into an urgent question of royal control, credibility, and survival. Palace officials had already noticed a pattern they could no longer dismiss. Meghan's personal achievements attracted attention, but the Sussex title transformed that attention into something larger. It gave each announcement immediate royal weight, pulling the monarchy into conversations it had not approved and could not easily control. Then came a new Sussex initiative, public-facing, carefully branded, and closely connected to Meghan's identity as Duchess of Sussex. It appeared independent from royal life, yet its power seemed to depend on the royal history behind her name. To courtiers, this was not simply another project. It was evidence that the title was becoming more valuable with distance, not less. That realization changed the pressure around Charles. He understood that any move against Meghan would strike Harry as well. It could affect his relationship with Archie and Lilibet and destroy what remained of the possibility of reconciliation. Charles was not deciding only as a king. He was deciding as a father who knew that one official act could become a permanent family wound. But senior advisors reportedly delivered a brutal warning. Indecision had become a decision of its own. Every month of silence strengthened the Sussex position while making the crown appear unwilling to defend the meaning of its titles. William's argument was said to be even sharper. He believed future monarchs should not inherit a crisis created by emotional hesitation. If Charles refused to clarify the rules now, William could one day be forced to take harsher action under even greater public pressure. Camilla reportedly urged Charles to separate private pain from constitutional duty. She understood that accusations of revenge would follow, but she also believed a sovereign could not allow fear of criticism to dictate royal policy. By then, communications officials had begun preparing language for a possible announcement. It would not be presented as punishment. It would be framed as modernization, consistency, and the protection of royal titles in a changing world. Charles still wanted to avoid a parliamentary battle. A public stripping of the Sussex title could become chaotic, humiliating, and politically explosive. He needed something quieter. Something broad enough to appear fair, yet precise enough to reclaim control. That was when the royal expert hinted that the king's preferred option was far more calculated than anyone had expected. Then came the detail that changed the entire story. Charles may not need to remove Meghan's title directly at all. His next move could make the title nearly impossible to use in the way that gives it power. The royal expert's revelation was more precise and potentially more damaging than expected. Charles was not merely considering whether Meghan should remain a duchess. He was reportedly exploring a new title framework that would separate royal rank from public use, leaving Meghan with the name but stripping away its greatest advantage. The proposal was as quiet as it was calculated. Rather than removing titles in one explosive act, Charles could introduce a formal rule preventing non-working royals from prominently using royal rank in commercial ventures, political campaigns, entertainment projects, or independently branded public work. Meghan might still technically remain Duchess of Sussex. The title could survive on paper, within the family, and during limited ceremonial occasions. But she would no longer be free to use it as a professional identity or as a symbol suggesting continued royal authority. That distinction changed everything. A direct removal would provoke outrage. It could be portrayed as a king publicly humiliating a biracial American woman and taking away a title granted when she married into his family. Such a move could strengthen Meghan's position by turning her into the victim of an institution still unwilling to let her go. This alternative was more controlled. It avoided the public spectacle while attacking the title's practical value. For Meghan, that could feel even more personal. Losing the title completely would create a clean break. Keeping it privately while being prevented from using it publicly would mean the palace still controlled where her identity began and ended. Her greatest advantage had always been the ability to operate outside royal discipline while remaining connected to royal prestige. Under the proposed framework, that balance would disappear. Future projects would have to succeed through Meghan's own reputation, products, audience, and achievements without the same visible support of royal rank. The change could also influence how broadcasters, organizations, and commercial partners describe her. Palace guidance might encourage them to avoid language that presents Meghan as an active royal figure, slowly weakening the automatic connection between her work and the crown. To prevent accusations that the rule targeted one person, Charles could apply it broadly. Other non-working royals might face similar limits, yet few inside or outside the palace would fail to understand which conflict had forced the reform. Advisors were reportedly considering new categories: dynastic titles linked to bloodline, working titles connected to official service, and private family styles with no public or commercial authority. It would create a modern royal hierarchy and draw a line the Sussexes could no longer ignore. Harry reacted with anger. He believed the palace was rewriting the understanding under which he and Meghan had left. Palace officials, however, insisted that no promise of permanent commercial freedom had ever been given. Meghan saw the deeper threat immediately. Charles was not taking her name. He was reclaiming the power behind it. And once that principle existed, it could raise an even more painful question. What would it eventually mean for Archie and Lilibet? Yet the moment the proposed rule reached the Sussexes, the dispute stopped being solely about Meghan. Harry reportedly realized that his father's decision could reach into the next generation and force him to choose between royal inheritance and permanent separation. Harry had spent years insisting that he wanted freedom from the institution, but freedom looked different when the palace began defining what his children could inherit. Charles' proposed title rule reportedly struck the one place Harry remained most vulnerable: his fear that Archie and Lilibet would be erased from their royal history. To Harry, the restriction was no longer simply about Meghan's public identity or the commercial value of the Sussex title. It felt like the beginning of a wider retreat, a gradual attempt to push his entire family further from the royal story until their connection existed only as a distant memory. That fear exposed the contradiction Harry had never fully resolved. He had condemned the machinery of monarchy, described its pressures, and escaped its control. Yet he still wanted Archie and Lilibet to be recognized as part of the family's history. He wanted them protected from royal life without being denied their birthright. Meghan reportedly viewed the threat differently. Her position was colder and more strategic. A family, she argued, could not build its future around titles controlled by people who might change the terms without warning. Depending on royal rank meant allowing the palace to retain influence over their children's identities. The difference created tension between them. Harry focused on inheritance, memory, and the bond his children carried through him. Meghan focused on independence, reputation, and the danger of surrendering control. Both wanted security, but they no longer agreed on where that security came from. Charles' view was equally firm. Titles, in his eyes, were not unconditional family possessions. They carried constitutional meaning, public expectations, and a connection to service. If royal grandchildren were raised outside Britain, performed no duties, and later used royal rank throughout commercial adult lives, the monarchy could face the same crisis again on an even larger scale. William reportedly supported a stricter future rule. He believed every descendant who chose not to serve the crown should face clear limits, regardless of personal relationships. For him, consistency was not cruelty. It was protection. Harry now considered his options. A public challenge could rally sympathy but destroy any remaining trust. A private confrontation might preserve the family bond, yet leave him negotiating from weakness. Using intermediaries offered distance, but it risked repeating the same pattern of silence and misunderstanding. Palace advisors were said to be ready for an emotional Sussex response. They had prepared for interviews, accusations, and claims that the institution was again punishing Harry's family. Then, a private message reportedly arrived from Charles. It contained no apology and no surrender. Instead, it offered Harry a choice: return to direct family negotiations, or allow the title process to continue without his voice shaping the outcome. Harry now faced a decision he had avoided since leaving royal life: speak to his father as a wounded son, or challenge him as the head of a rival household determined to defend its own future. Behind the public silence, a private negotiation reportedly began taking shape. There would be no cameras, no ceremonial smiles, and no carefully staged reunion. Only conditions, consequences, and one question neither side could avoid: how much royal identity could the Sussexes keep without serving the crown? Charles reportedly wanted the dispute contained before it became a public constitutional battle. A dramatic confrontation could force politicians, lawyers, commentators, and rival palace factions into a conflict that might damage everyone involved. His preferred solution was a private settlement, quiet enough to preserve dignity, but firm enough to restore the crown's authority. The proposed conditions were precise. Royal titles would remain clearly separated from commercial ventures. Royal imagery could not be used in ways that suggested official approval. Sensitive announcements involving the monarchy would require advance consultation, preventing the palace from being surprised by projects connected to its name. To Meghan, those demands would carry a hidden price. She had left working royal life to escape institutional control. Accepting new restrictions could allow the palace to influence her career from thousands of miles away, deciding where her identity ended and royal authority began. Harry attempted to find a middle path. He reportedly sought exemptions for charitable work, family occasions, and matters involving Archie and Lilibet. He wanted the Sussex identity protected as part of their private family life, even if its professional use became more limited. Palace advisors, however, wanted something in return. They believed private disagreements could no longer be presented as global moral trials whenever negotiations failed. The Sussexes, they argued, could not ask for confidential compromise while keeping public pressure as a weapon. Charles was prepared to offer symbolic concessions. The family could retain private styles. The children's heritage would continue to be acknowledged. Invitations to selected royal occasions might remain possible. These gestures would preserve a thread of belonging without granting unlimited public freedom. William reportedly saw danger in every exception. A special Sussex arrangement could create loopholes, weaken the reform, and leave future monarchs trapped inside the same confusion. Rules designed to protect the institution, he believed, had to survive personal emotion. Meghan may have considered another option: reducing her use of the title voluntarily before restrictions were imposed. Presented carefully, it could look like independence rather than defeat. But both sides understood that public perception would become its own battlefield. Whoever defined the decision first could control whether it appeared to be royal punishment or personal liberation. Failure would cost more than a title agreement. It could destroy Charles's last realistic hope of repairing his relationship with Harry. Yet the royal expert warned that the king was running out of room. Continued delay would no longer appear compassionate. It would appear weak. And when the final choice arrives, the consequences will extend far beyond one duchess, one marriage, or one fractured family. The decision could redefine what a royal title means in the modern world. The monarchy has survived abdications, betrayals, broken marriages, and public rebellion. But the Sussex crisis created a uniquely modern threat: royal status existing beyond royal control. Charles' final decision may determine whether titles remain sacred instruments of the crown or become permanent personal brands no monarch can reclaim. For Charles, the choice had become a test of strength, judgment, and survival. He needed to modernize the rules without making the monarchy appear frightened of Meghan, or determined to punish her, move too harshly, and the crown could look vindictive. Move too softly, and royal authority might continue slipping beyond palace control. A successful reform would establish a clear principle. Titles could still be inherited or granted, but their public power would depend on duty, responsibility, and the sovereign's approval. Royal rank would no longer operate as a permanent personal possession, untouched by distance, resignation, or rebellion. That principle could protect William's future reign. Without it, distant members of the family might one day carry royal titles into commercial ventures, political causes, entertainment projects, or global activism, forcing every new monarch to confront the same dangerous uncertainty. But Meghan would not be without options. She could begin using her own name more aggressively, turning the restriction into a declaration of independence. Rather than appearing defeated, she could argue that the palace had revealed its fear of a woman succeeding beyond its control. Losing unrestricted access to the Duchess title might weaken her immediate advantage. Yet it could also push her toward an identity no king could regulate. Harry, however, would carry the deepest emotional wound. Meghan could redefine herself. Harry could never fully escape the inheritance into which he was born. He remained caught between the family he defended in California and the royal history that shaped every part of his life. Charles faced the same painful contradiction from the opposite side. Enforcing the rule might protect the institution he had waited decades to lead, but it could permanently damage his bond with his younger son. The crown might gain clarity while the family lost its final path toward reconciliation. The public would divide instantly. Some would call it necessary reform. Others would see calculated punishment, delayed revenge, or proof that the institution still feared the Sussexes' influence. And there was one final irony. The harder the palace tried to separate itself from Meghan, the more attention the conflict could bring her. Every restriction could become another headline. Every boundary could create another battle. The true power of Charles' move was never simply removing a word from Meghan's name. It was deciding who controlled the meaning behind that word. But if Meghan lost the royal advantage that helped shape her global identity, would the crown finally contain the Sussex problem, or create an even more determined opponent? Because behind every royal title lies an invisible bargain between privilege and duty, and once that bargain is broken, even a king may discover that reclaiming control comes at a devastating personal price.